webinar for today. This is, as I mentioned earlier, our third out of fifth module on Afghan culture, and we're talking a lot about cultural and practical considerations for working with Afghan clients. In today's module, we're going to go over ethnicity and considerations for mitigating interethnic tension. And this webinar is brought to you by Switchboard, which is a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers. My name is Medina Masumi. I'm a training officer with Switchboard, but for today's purposes, I'll be your facilitator for this webinar. Today's session is going to run about 30 minutes. It's being recorded, and within 24 hours, you're going to receive an email with this entire slide deck and recommended resources as well. We're also going to post this webinar on our Switchboard website as well within the next 24 hours. We're going to go ahead and talk a little bit again about some Zoom logistics. I know that we've gone over it before. You are going to be, or you can connect with your phone today. You can switch between your phone and your computer. This is listen only mode. But if you need to change your audio settings, that's on the lower left side of your screen. Due to the large size of this webinar, the chat feature is not going to allow you to chat with each other, but you can chat with the panelists. So if you have something to say with us, you can write in the chat. And we also recommend you keeping an eye on the chat because we drop in different links and resources as the webinar progresses. You can ask questions, so use the Q&A feature, and we encourage you to do that. You can type your questions throughout the webinar. We'll try to answer it as the webinar goes on and hopefully have time for at the end for additional questions. And if you see a question that you would like to vote, please use the thumbs up icon to vote for another participant's questions. You can also have the option to turn on the closed caption feature as well if you desire to do that. Okay, we are going to go ahead, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers for today. We have Dr. Farid Saydee, who is an adjunct professor at the School of Curriculum and Teaching at Kean University. He's also the founder and president of Language Mentors. Dr. Saydee is a native of Afghanistan. He speaks both Pashto and Dari. He's also developed one of the strongest Dari and Pashto programs in the entire country and has extensive experience teaching culture courses as well as language. Professor Saydee has also worked as a refugee service provider from the IRC in San Diego. His roles have included resettlement case manager, job developer, and immigration case manager. We're also joined by our very own Amalia Mirza. She's a training officer for Switchboard, and her focus is case management. For 18 years, she's worked as a social worker with refugee populations in mental health and hospital settings. Malia speaks 5 languages, and she holds a Master's of Social Work from the University of Washington. So just to recap, as I mentioned earlier, today's learning objective is to name the major ethnic groups in Afghanistan and also talk a little bit about considerations for mitigating interethnic tension. And I just want to preface this webinar by saying we understand and we know that this is a very heavy topic. And by no means do we expect that within the 30 minutes of this topic that you all are going to have all the strategies for dealing with interethnic tensions. I wish it were that easy, but we just want to give you guys an overview of the different ethnic groups in Afghanistan and some just general considerations, but this is definitely something that's an ongoing process for gaining information and learning more strategies. We're going to go ahead and jump into our Slido. And if you guys could just either scan the QR code or go to slido.com and enter the code below. The question that we have for you today is a true or false question. And it says the importance of ethnic identity decreases for Afghans as they migrate abroad. So go ahead and take some time to answer that for us. We have responses coming in already. 85% saying false, 86% saying false, about 14% saying true. It's moving up and down. So we do have our answers coming in. And I think for what you will learn from today's webinar is that the ethnic tension, the ethnic identity does not decrease when Afghans migrate. It's very much stays with them. And then so does the ethnic tensions that we're going to have to sort of learn how to work through and to support people who are facing these dilemmas. So we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Malia, who's going to go over ethnicity in Afghanistan with you all.
Thank you, Medina. We are going to give a little background about ethnicity in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, there are 14 ethnic groups. Ethnicity, along with Islam, provide as the foundation of individual and collective identity. One's ethnic identity affects the region in which they live, the language they speak, the ethical code they live by, the policies they identify with, and also the relationship they create. We are going to the next slide. In here, we are going to talk about major ethnic groups. And so major ethnic groups are in Afghanistan. Pashtuns are the largest ethnic groups, about 42%, live in southern and eastern region of Afghanistan, and their primary language is Pashto, and they are Sunni Muslims. The second largest ethnic group are Tajiks, and they are around 25%, and they are spread throughout the country. They are Sunni Muslim, and they speak Dari. The third largest ethnic groups is Hazara, and they are 10% of population. They are originally from Hazarajat region, and they speak regional dialect of Farsi, known as Hazaragi. Hazaras have a strong East Asian feature, and they are Shia Muslims. Also, the fourth largest ethnic group is Uzbeks. They are around 6 to 10%. They live in northern Afghanistan, and they speak Uzbeki. They also have East Asian features, and they are Sunni Muslims. And now I'll pass it to Farid.
Thank you, Maliha. Yes, as you know, this ethnic tensions in Afghanistan, that's a major problem. It's a major topic, major problem. And this problem has been present among Pashtuns and non-Pashtuns since the establishment of Afghanistan in 1700s. However, the actual roots of ethnic tensions go back to late 1800s when Abdurrahman was the ruler of Afghanistan, and he started forced migration of non-Pashtuns and distributed their lands and properties to Pashtun tribes. Basically, he planted the seeds of distrust between ethnic communities in Afghanistan. Although in 1964, when the constitution during King Zahir Shah was passed, it recognized minorities' rights, but by then tensions had become embedded in the social relationships of all ethnic groups. Ethnic conflicts further intensified when the Russian invaded and stayed there for 10 years. Warring factions fighting the government were relied heavily on their ethnic loyalty. When the Taliban emerged in 1994, they quickly secured allegiance from local Pashtun commanders. And on the opposite side, mostly non-Pashtun groups formed a united front to fight the Taliban, which was called the Northern Alliance. Between 1996 to 2001, the Taliban and Northern Alliance committed unspeakable crimes against each other. A lot of people were murdered and killed from both sides, or from all sides. Problems continue today. The current Taliban government is predominantly composed of Pashtun members, and less than 10% of the key governmental posts are held by other ethnic groups. Can we go to the next slide? As mentioned earlier, these tensions have infiltrated every aspect of Afghan society, and it remains part of public memory. It's not easy to forget about it. We cannot assume that they simply disappear when Afghans migrate or resettled abroad. On the contrary, interethnic tensions influences how Afghan refugees interact and form their communities. In Afghanistan, the situation is a little bit different. Many individuals fear to voice their concerns and explicitly express their contempt for other groups. Those fears kind of like diminish when they are here, when they leave Afghanistan. For instance, here, this quote from an Afghan immigrant. One interesting thing was Afghan refugees were already exposed to ethnic conflict back in Afghanistan, but there was a sense of covering it or hiding it out of respect. But when they came here, because of liberty and freedom of speech, because there was no fear, they would attack or resources would be taken from them. The ethnic tensions got worse. It became like an extreme version of that racism. They became more expressive. So from this, we see that from this testimony that it clearly this testimony clearly demonstrates that Afghan refugees become more outspoken when they are out of Afghanistan, especially when they are in the United States because of all the freedoms and rights that individuals have. And they also quickly form boundaries based on ethnicity and exclude individuals from other ethnic groups. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Now that we have some background information about ethnic tensions, I think we need to think of ways not to let these tensions affect our work and services we provide to Afghan newcomers. Of course, we cannot solve these problems and eliminate tensions between Afghans, but we must make sure that they know that they have to coexist in a non-threatening environment. That's the most important message from this lesson, I think. We can establish clear guidelines and policies to follow. For example, here are some ideas, some suggestions. Try to find interpreters from all major ethnic groups so that you may match clients with the appropriate interpreters. Provide frequent orientation on codes of conduct and discuss consequences of violations. And also consider the items that we discussed today and in previous modules when interacting with Afghans. Now back to you, Medina, please. Medina, back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Farid and Malia, for that information. And we know that it was brief, but now we have some time left to answer questions that you guys might have. So please go ahead at this moment and use our Q&A feature to ask any questions you've had, perhaps just general questions or maybe about specific experiences that you've had in regards to ethnic tensions, interethnic tensions among Afghans. I'm going to just give a few seconds here in case anyone has things they want to share about. I have one question coming in about what ethnicity do most Dari speakers tend to be? Farid, the question is, what ethnicity do most Dari speakers tend to be?
Yes, we already, I think we already talked about that. That's the Dari is the main language that is spoken by Tajiks, and it's also is spoken by Hazaras. And on the other side, we can also say that Dari is a lingua franca of the country, and almost most of Afghans are speaking, including other minorities like Uzbeks, Turkmens. They have their own languages, but when it comes to communicating with other Afghans, they use Dari. But mainly it is the language of Tajiks and Hazara. Hazaragi is a dialect of Dari.
Thank you for that clarification. Oh, there's a good question here. I think it says, please clarify your reference to code of conduct and consequences to violations of that.
Yes, code of conduct, it applies to those people who work with refugees, especially with interpreters. In the previous module last week, we talked a little bit more in detail about that. One thing that has created some problems is this issue of confidentiality and privacy. So the interpreters and those people who work with Afghans, they should know what to do and how to do their jobs, especially when it comes to confidentiality and respect and helping them and all those things that a professional person needs to do in a professional environment. So they should not kind of like make it personal, or sometimes they should stick to the job that they are assigned to. For example, if we have an Afghan interpreters, and during the sessions, they should stick to the interpretation jobs. They should not switch their roles to be like a consultant or share their personal experience or do something else. They should know that at that moment they're interpreters, and there are some do's and don'ts that they should follow. So guidelines, strategy.
Thank you for that answer. There's another question that several attendees voted on. It says, can you go into some of the differences between the ethnic groups? What are the sources of the tension between these ethnic groups?
Well, we talked about that. It's not something that has popped up today or yesterday. It goes back to 1700s when Afghanistan was formed during the time of Ahmad Shah Durrani, and for the past 300 years, Pashtuns have been in power, mostly the Durrani wings of Pashtuns, and that's why other ethnicities, they believe that they have been dominated by Pashtuns and they have not been given the right. And also there are some instances, like I mentioned, during late 1800s, beginning of 1900s, when Abdurrahman Khan formed the Afghanistan, modern Afghanistan. At that time, he did something to minorities. For example, he killed, and based on one of the resources, reliable resources, he killed about 60% of Hazaras and forced most of them to leave the country to Pakistan. And then he distributed their lands and their properties to other Pashtun ethnicities. There were some uprisings. That's why he did that. So this is something that has historical roots, and up to now, it continues.
Thank you. I know that you talked about that as well, but I think one of the other biggest reasons that a lot of this tension exists is that power and positions of power and leadership in the country have always been in the hands of Pashtuns historically, since the times of the monarchies. So that is obviously a huge stemming piece of a lot of this tension as well. What is the most common way ethnic tensions are expressed in the US?
Well, it is kind of like hard to see that people explicitly express it, but they show it in their behavior. For example, if you have Afghans gathering and there are different ethnicities, you see that they are kind of like go and gather with their member of their own ethnic group. So they don't socialize with other ethnic groups that much. And the same way, for example, if you have a client and you have an interpreter that they are not from the same ethnicity, they may discriminate. They may not provide correct information. So there are something that has been seen and reported. We just need to watch for those behaviors. We need to make sure that the client and interpreter, both of them, they feel comfortable working with each other. Maliha, you're welcome to jump in and share experience because you have been working with them directly.
There's another question. Malia, this could be a great one for you. How can we appropriately deal with interpreters who make racist comments regarding ethnicity?
Thank you, Madina. So again, it depends on interpreter. If you don't speak the language, you may not even understand what the interpreter is saying because they will be communicating with, with the language of clients. For example, if they speak Pashto, they might speak Pashto, but also you could figure out by if you notice that your client is going back and forth with the interpreter, and the interpreter, if you have a special interpreter over the phone, their voice increase and they go back and forth. That's the time that you should stop and say, okay, what's going on? Can I understand? Can you explain to me? And also, as we mentioned, previously, don't assume that your client do not understand English. Also ask your client if they could explain to you, what has happened. Again, just to stop the interpreter. And then ask for clarification to see what has happened. And that's the way you will figure out that they are not the best match.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, if an interpreter is being racist, that's inappropriate conduct to begin with, right? So I think that would be important to question their ability to perform the job at hand also. Okay, there's a question that says, Zora is asking why so much hatred between all these nations. I think she means the ethnicities. And Zora, I think Farid talked about that already when he got in a little bit more about the tensions that are existing. So I'm going to move on to another question. It says, we have a small English class with mixed ethnicity Afghans. Any tips? I can go ahead and answer this one for Elizabeth. Sure. Elizabeth, I think really following the lead of the class is important. We had a similar question come up at a public webinar last week, which was geared towards educators that said, oh, is there something we should be doing in class? Should we be proactively separating these different groups? And, we recognize and acknowledge that the tensions are here, that they will exist here too. But I think it's really important to sort of make sure your environment is safe for everybody that's attending your classes or in other groups where there's going to be different ethnicities. The safety of your participants are the primary concern, and then sort of really lead with, kind of follow their lead. If it's a safe environment, people feel like they are open to getting to know each other. And there's boundaries that are set in the class in terms of how people should behave and how they need to respect each other, and a policy of, preventing discrimination, which should be the case anywhere we go. If you feel like that those are set and that it's a workable environment, then you would go with it. But if you notice that there are tensions coming up, or, even things that are sort of happening kind of covertly or passively, I think it would be important to address those. But if it's a class that already has a lot of diversity and inclusion and opportunities to do that, then why not help them learn to coexist and to get past some of those tensions? Let's see, I think we have time for a couple more questions. We sometimes see this in the classroom. Aside from general acceptance exercises, is there anything we can do to gear children towards repeating or prevent children from repeating their parents' views? So Jesse, I think sort of my answer to the previous question really goes into that as well. I think anything that you would do in an environment that's gonna practice a cooperation, setting boundaries of respecting each other and each other's beliefs, and really challenging their preconceived notions by getting to know one another better. is something that you'd want to do. I think that that's generationally, if we think about interethnic tension or systemic racism, I mean, that's been something that we've needed to do, is to challenge ourselves further. And I think that's what it would be important to do with the children based on their safety and their comfort level. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. Is there a way to identify which ethnicity a client is from? What's an acceptable way to ask? Farid, I'll let you answer that.
I don't know. When I was working at the IRC, usually the initial information was providing some information about the place of origin, the birthplace. So birthplace kind of like give some information about the ethnicity, and also the language that they speak. But we should not kind of like deceived by that, because of living and Farsi or Dari speaking environment, most Pashtuns also speak Farsi and Dari or Dari. And if they speak Dari, we should not assume that they're not Pashtuns or they're non-Pashtuns. So that's something that we can consider, but we cannot rely on that. Maybe we can ask them that which part of Afghanistan they are, and then from that we can kind of like guess their ethnicities. If they're from the south or from the west part of the country, then most probably they are Pashtuns, most probably, but it's not. We cannot say 100%, because we have Hazaras also in Kandahar and the western country. So these are some tips. Sometimes you see when you talk with them, if you feel that level of comfort, you can ask them that which ethnicity they are. But please make sure that later on that doesn't count against you. That if something happens, if they're not satisfied with your services, they should not blame you that, oh, you discriminated against them because they belong to such and such ethnicity. It's kind of like a very sensitive. The same thing in the United States as well. It's really hard to ask someone, but where are you from?
Yeah,
Maliha?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I'd really go by their lead. I think you guys would know better in terms of which clients are open and willing to share and who might be a little bit more apprehensive. I do think that that's a tricky question, because there's definitely people that could get offended by you asking about and wondering why. And based on that, what conclusions might you make? I think you'd really have to reflect on what your goal would be for understanding that information. And, you know, is it really relevant to that work for that moment? Somebody's
And
also, go ahead.
Sorry, Medina. I also want to add that most of the times we talk about Pashtuns and about how many years that they have been in power, and other ethnicities. They're kind of like a field felt that they have not been in power and kind of like dominated by Pashtuns. But again, we should not generalize. So we should not say that all Pashtuns are thinking this way, or all Pashtuns are leaned towards this, or they're all, for example, against the women or against education. So we should not generalize. That's very scary if we generalize these stereotype of things.
Hey, thank you so much for all your wonderful questions. I see that there's still many more unanswered. I know that this is a very heavy, multi-layered topic, and we really can only touch the tip of the iceberg. But if you guys have lingering questions that you'd like to, please email us, contact us. I'll share our contact information in just a second. Here are some recommended resources to definitely give you guys more insight on this topic and information. Again, this will all be emailed to you within 24 hours along with the slide deck. We hope that we've met this learning objective for you guys to have learned about who the ethnic groups are in Afghanistan, and a brief overview of recognizing and considering considerations for mitigating interethnic tension. This is how you can stay connected with us. Please, we encourage you to contact us. You can use any three of these connection sites to connect with us if you have any further questions or comments or feedback. There's also going to be a survey, as always. It will be dropped in the chat, or you can also use this QR code to give us some feedback on today's module. If you are part of our certificate course, a separate link will be sent to you, and that certificate course is going to be starting momentarily on the other link. Thank you guys again for your time today, and we will see you next week for Module 4. Have a wonderful day.